The notary's office hadn't changed in years. Same mahogany desk, same leather chairs, same ticking grandfather clock in the corner counting seconds like pennies. Like every formal family gathering since I was 16, Dad sat at the head of the table, shoulders squared, jaw set. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while my brother Marcus scrolled through his phone, barely concealing his smirk. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I was prepared for whatever came next. Then as the notary adjusted his glasses and looked up, Dad turned to me and said coldly, "You get nothing." The pen slipped from my hand. I blinked. What? A pause? Then everything went quiet. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena. 3 weeks ago, my grandfather passed away. He was the patriarch of our family, the founder of Westbrook Industries, and the only person who ever truly believed in me. I was his first grandchild, the one he taught to fish on lazy summer afternoons, the one who sat in his office after school watching him review blueprints and negotiate deals. "Pay attention, little bird," he'd say, "someday you'll need to know how this works." The formal reading of his will brought our fractured family together for the first time in months. Dad had taken over the company 5 years ago when Grandpa's health began to decline. My brother Marcus worked alongside him, groomed to be the heir apparent. I chose a different path, environmental engineering, which Dad dismissed as wasteful idealism. Our relationship had been strained ever since. As I was saying, the notary continued, his voice cutting through the tension. "According to the explicit instructions of Edward James Westbrook, his granddaughter Elena Marie Westbrook shall receive no direct inheritance from his estate." Dad's smile widened, but the notary wasn't finished. Instead, he continued, adjusting his glasses, "As per documents executed 3 years ago, she already owns controlling interest in Westbrook Industries through a separate trust, along with the family estate and all associated properties." The room exploded. Dad slammed his fist on the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is impossible. Check again." Marcus threw his phone down, suddenly paying attention. Mom's quiet tears turned to open sobbing. The notary remained unfazed, sliding a folder across the table toward me. "Ms. Westbrook, these papers confirm your 51% ownership stake in the company, effective immediately. Your grandfather transferred these assets to you gradually over the past 3 years to minimize tax implications. Everything is in order." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside was a handwritten note from Grandpa, "Little bird, you're ready to fly now. Don't let them clip your wings." The walk to my apartment felt surreal. Spring in Boston usually energized me, the cherry blossoms along Commonwealth Avenue, students sprawled across the common, the sense of renewal after a brutal winter. But today I barely noticed any of it. My mind replayed the scene in the notary's office on an endless loop, Dad's shocked face, Marcus's stammered objections, the weight of the folder in my hands. I'd spent the past 3 years living on a tight budget, stretching my research stipend to cover rent for my tiny one-bedroom apartment, utilities, groceries, and student loan payments. My environmental engineering doctorate wasn't funded as generously as the business programs where my friends studied. Most days I survived on instant oatmeal for breakfast, peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, and whatever I could throw together for dinner, usually pasta with whatever vegetables were on sale that week. My shoes had worn thin months ago, but I'd put off replacing them. My winter coat had a tear in the sleeve I'd mended with duct tape. I took extra teaching assistant positions to make ends meet, grading papers until my eyes burned and my hands cramped. But I never complained. I never asked my family for help. Not after the last time. 2 years ago, my research equipment failed during a critical experiment. I needed $5,000 to replace it or risk losing months of work. I swallowed my pride and called Dad. "That environmental nonsense," he'd scoffed. "Elena, when will you grow up and join the real world? Marcus is already managing a department at Westbrook. What are you contributing to the family legacy?" "Nothing." I never forgot the sting of his words, the casual cruelty in his dismissal. I took out another loan instead and worked nights at a campus coffee shop until it was paid off. I learned to stand on my own, to make do with less, to find worth in my work rather than my wallet. I told myself it was character building. Sometimes I even believed it. My apartment building came into view, a pre-war structure with perpetually temperamental plumbing and windows that rattled in the wind. Nothing like the Westbrook estate where I'd grown up, with its sprawling gardens and view of the Atlantic. Nothing like the penthouse where Marcus lived, courtesy of Dad's generosity. The contrast had never felt so stark as it did today. Inside, I dropped my keys on the counter and sank onto my threadbare couch, still clutching the folder from the notary. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, catching dust motes in its beam. The reality of my situation slowly began to sink in. I wasn't just Elena, the struggling graduate student, anymore. I was Elena Westbrook, majority owner of a company worth billions. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I left the notary's office. 12 missed calls from Dad. 8 from Marcus. 3 from Mom. I silenced it and set it aside. They'd had years to talk to me, to see me as more than a disappointment. I needed time to think. I opened the folder again and spread the documents across my coffee table. Beyond the controlling interest in Westbrook Industries, Grandpa had left me the family estate, his art collection, his investment portfolio, and a separate fund dedicated to environmental innovation, something we'd discussed during our last few visits, but I never imagined he'd actually create. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tucked between the legal papers was another note, this one longer than the first. Elena, by now you know what I've done. Your father and brother will be furious, your mother conflicted. They won't understand at first. Perhaps they never will. But I've watched you forge your own path without complaint, without compromise. I've seen your dedication to improving the world rather than simply profiting from it. Westbrook Industries needs your vision, your principles, your steadfast heart. The company has lost its way under your father's leadership, too focused on quarterly profits, not enough on lasting impact. You alone can restore the balance. Tears blurred my vision as I read his words. Grandpa had seen me, really seen me, when everyone else in the family looked right through me. He'd valued my choices when Dad had only criticized them. The weight of his trust settled on my shoulders, heavy but not unwelcome. Later that evening, I finally checked my voicemails. Dad's messages progressed from disbelief to anger to something approaching negotiation. Elena, call me immediately. There's clearly been a mistake. Then, this is outrageous. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly. We'll contest it. Finally, we need to talk about what this means for the company. For the family. Call me. Marcus was less restrained. What did you do? How did you manipulate Grandpa into this? You have no idea how to run a company. You'll destroy everything Dad and I have built. Mom's messages were softer, pleading. Sweetheart, please call us. Your father is beside himself. We can work through this as a family. I deleted them all. Tomorrow would be soon enough for confrontations. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities, with questions, with doubts. Was I capable of leading Westbrook Industries? Did I even want to? Could I honor Grandpa's vision while staying true to my own principles? Dawn found me at my tiny kitchen table. Laptop open, researching the company's recent projects, environmental impact reports, labor practices, executive compensation. What I found troubled me deeply. Under Dad's leadership, Westbrook had cut corners on environmental compliance, fought against unionization efforts, outsourced manufacturing to facilities with questionable safety standards, and invested heavily in fossil fuel extraction. Everything Grandpa had once stood against. Everything I had spent my academic career working to change. My first day as majority owner began with a shower that ran cold after 3 minutes, typical for my building, and a breakfast of black coffee and the last banana from my fruit bowl. The irony wasn't lost on me. On paper, I was now one of the wealthiest women in Massachusetts, yet my refrigerator contained half a carton of milk, some wilting spinach, and a jar of peanut butter. I dressed in the best clothes I owned, a navy blazer I'd found at a consignment shop, a simple white blouse, and my one pair of professional slacks. Not exactly the wardrobe of a corporate titan, but it would have to do. I pulled my hair back into a neat ponytail, applied minimal makeup, and studied my reflection. The same green eyes that had looked back at me yesterday stared out from the mirror today. I was still me, just me with a company to run. The Westbrook Industries headquarters dominated the Boston skyline, 50 stories of glass and steel gleaming in the morning sun. I'd visited occasionally as a child, trailing behind Grandpa as he greeted every security guard, janitor, and executive by name. I hadn't set foot inside since he stepped down as CEO. The security guard at the front desk did a double take when I gave my name. Ms. Westbrook? Do you have an appointment? I smiled, summoning confidence I didn't entirely feel. No appointment necessary. I own the building. Word traveled fast. By the time I reached the executive floor, Dad was waiting for me, his face a mask of controlled fury. Elena. My office. Now. I followed him into the corner suite with its panoramic views of the harbor. The office had been Grandpa's once. Now it was Dad's, with all traces of its previous occupant erased, the fishing photos replaced with modern art, the worn leather chairs swapped for sleek ergonomic designs, the collection of vintage paperweights nowhere to be seen. What exactly do you think you're doing? Dad demanded once the door closed behind us. Visiting my company, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I thought it was time I took a more active interest in my investment. This isn't a game, Elena. Westbrook Industries employs thousands of people. We have shareholders, contracts, obligations. You can't just waltz in here because of some misguided bequest. It wasn't misguided, I said. Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing. Your grandfather was sentimental and soft in his old age. He indulged your environmental fantasies because they amused him. But running this company requires business acumen, industry relationships, practical experience, none of which you have. And yet here we are, I said, gesturing to the office, to the building, to everything that was now, technically, mine. We can fight about this, or we can find a way forward. Your choice. Dad's jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might throw me out bodily. Instead, he sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 58 years. What do you want, Elena? Money? A title? Your own division to play with? Name it, and we can end this farce. The dismissal in his tone sparked something in me, not just anger, but resolve. I want to honor Grandpa's legacy. I want Westbrook Industries to be a company he would be proud of again. I've spent the morning reviewing our environmental impact reports, our labor practices, our community engagement initiatives, or lack thereof. We can do better. We will do better. Idealistic nonsense, Dad muttered. This is business, not a charity. It can be both profitable and responsible, I countered. And as majority shareholder, I intend to ensure it's both. Our standoff was interrupted by Marcus bursting into the office, clearly fresh from the squash court in his designer athletic wear. Is it true? He demanded, glaring at me. You're here to take over? I'm here to understand what I own, I corrected him. And to make some necessary changes. You? Marcus laughed, the sound brittle and forced. You couldn't manage a lemonade stand. You've been playing with test tubes while Dad and I have been running this company. And how's that working out? I asked, pulling up a financial report on my phone. Stock down 12% year over year. 3 lawsuits pending for environmental violations. Employee turnover at an all-time high. Doesn't seem like your business. Expertise is serving Westbrook particularly well. Marcus flushed dark red. You little, that's enough, Dad cut in. Elena, be reasonable. You have no experience in this industry. The board won't accept your leadership. The shareholders will panic. You'll tank the company's value before you implement a single one of your green initiatives. I don't have to run it day to day, I said, an idea forming. Not yet, anyway. But I will have oversight. Effective immediately, I'm establishing an environmental responsibility committee with veto power over new projects. I'll be chairing it. And I'll be bringing in some new board members with expertise in sustainable business practices. Dad's eyes narrowed. You can't just, I can, I interrupted. And I will. Unless you'd prefer I exercise my voting rights to remove the current management entirely? I have the power to do that, as I'm sure the notary explained. The threat hung in the air between us. Dad and Marcus exchanged glances, a silent communication honed by years of working together while excluding me. Finally, Dad spoke. We'll need to discuss this with the board, with legal. There are procedures, protocols. Of course, I agreed. I've already scheduled a meeting with the board for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I'd like access to all company records, especially those pertaining to our current environmental compliance and labor practices. You're making a mistake, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. You're not cut out for this world, Elena. You never were. I met his gaze steadily. Maybe this world needs to change, then. As I left the building an hour later, armed with temporary security credentials and login information for the company servers, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom, please come home. We need to talk as a family. The Westbrook estate sprawled across 5 acres of prime coastal property, a colonial revival mansion that had been in the family for generations. As I drove through the wrought iron gates, memories flooded back, learning to ride a bike on the circular driveway, helping Grandpa tend his vegetable garden behind the greenhouse, reading for hours in the window seat of the library that faced the ocean. Mom waited for me on the front steps, her slender frame wrapped in a cashmere cardigan despite the mild spring temperature. She'd always felt the cold more than the rest of us. Elena, she said, pulling me into a hug that felt both familiar and strange. Thank you for coming. Inside, the house was just as I remembered, grand without being ostentatious, comfortable despite its size. Family photographs lined the hallway leading to the library, generations of Westbrooks staring out from silver frames. I noticed That the recent photos were mostly of Marcus, his college graduation, his engagement party, the marriage had lasted 8 months, his first day at Westbrook Industries. The last photo of me had been taken before I left for graduate school. Mom led me to the library where Dad waited, a tumbler of scotch in his hand though it was barely past noon. He didn't rise when I entered. "You've certainly thrown us all for a loop," Mom said, attempting a smile as she gestured for me to sit. "Your grandfather always did have a flair for the dramatic." "It wasn't drama," I said. "It was trust. He trusted me to carry forward his vision for the company." "His vision," Dad scoffed. "My father was brilliant in his time, but the business world has changed. His sentimental attachment to old ways of doing things was holding us back. Westbrook Industries needs to evolve to survive." "Evolve doesn't have to mean exploit," I countered. "We can innovate without sacrificing our values." "Values don't pay dividends," Dad shot back. Mom placed a restraining hand on his arm. "What your father means is that there are practical considerations. The board has expectations. Our shareholders have expectations. And what about our responsibilities?" I asked. "To our workers? To the communities where we operate? To the environment?" Grandpa understood those responsibilities. When did we lose sight of them? Dad drained his scotch and set the glass down with more force than necessary. "You have no idea what it takes to keep a company like Westbrook competitive in today's market. None. You've been living in your academic bubble, playing with your environmental theories while the real world moves on." "I know more than you think," I said. "I know that last year, Westbrook was fined $20 million for dumping chemical waste into the Merrimack River, a fact you kept out of the annual report by burying it in a subsidiary's accounts. I know we're sourcing raw materials from mines with documented human rights abuses. I know we fought every attempt at unionization in our factories while the executive team gave themselves record bonuses." Dad's face went pale. He hadn't expected me to know those details, information. I'd spent the night researching through public records, environmental watchdog reports, and financial filings. For years, I'd kept my distance from the family business, focusing on my own path. Now I realized my mistake. Silence wasn't neutrality, it was complicity. "Those situations are complex," Mom interjected, always the peacemaker. "Business decisions aren't always black and white." "Some are," I insisted. "Poisoning a river is wrong. Exploiting workers is wrong. These aren't gray areas." Dad stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the Atlantic. "You sound just like him. All principle, no practicality." "Is that so terrible?" I asked. Grandpa built Westbrook Industries from nothing into something remarkable, and he did it without compromising his ethics. The company thrived under his leadership. "Times have changed," Dad said, not turning from the window. "Not as much as you think," I replied. "People still value integrity. They still want to work for and buy from companies they can trust." Mom leaned forward, her voice gentle but urgent. "Elena, sweetheart, no one is saying your concerns aren't valid. But perhaps there's a compromise here. You could join the board, advocate for the changes you want to see, but leave the day-to-day operations to your father and brother. They have the experience in running the company into the ground, morally if not financially." I interrupted, harsher than I intended. Mom flinched, and I immediately regretted my tone. "I'm sorry, Mom. But I can't just be a figurehead. Grandpa trusted me with this responsibility." "He was wrong to put this burden on you," Dad said, finally turning back to face me. "Wrong to bypass the succession plan we'd established. Wrong to think you could step into this role with no preparation." I met his gaze steadily. He didn't think I was unprepared. He'd been watching me, talking to me, teaching me all along. "You just never noticed." Dad's expression hardened. "I built my life around this company. Sacrificed time with my family, my health, everything for Westbrook Industries. And now you think you can just walk in and change everything overnight because of some misplaced sense of moral superiority?" "Not overnight," I said. "But yes, things will change. They need to." The silence that followed felt weighted, generations of Westbrook stubbornness colliding in a single moment. Finally, Mom spoke. "It's getting late. Elena, will you stay for dinner? Your old room is just as you left it." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to retreat to my apartment, to process everything that had happened in the familiar comfort of my own space. But another part recognized the importance of this moment, of not walking away from the difficult conversations ahead. "I'll stay. Thank you." Dinner was a tense affair. Marcus joined us, bringing his current girlfriend, a willowy blonde named Vanessa who worked in marketing at Westbrook and laughed too loudly at his mediocre jokes. The conversation stayed carefully neutral, focusing on the unseasonably warm Weather, an upcoming charity gala, the renovation of the guest house. No one mentioned the company, the will, or the seismic shift in family dynamics. Later, as I was preparing for bed in my childhood room, there was a soft knock at the door. Mom entered, carrying a mug of chamomile tea, our old ritual whenever I was troubled or couldn't sleep. "I thought you might need this," she said, setting the mug on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling 16 again. "Thanks, Mom." She lingered, straightening items on my dresser that didn't need straightening. "Your father doesn't mean to be harsh. He's just scared." "Dad? Scared?" The concept seemed absurd. Richard Westbrook had never shown fear in my presence, only certainty, judgment, and occasional disappointment. He's built his entire identity around being Edward Westbrook's son and successor. Now he feels like his father rejected him in favor of you. It's shaken him deeply. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Grandpa didn't reject him. He just saw something in me that Dad never bothered to look for. Mom sat beside me, her voice soft. "When you were little, before Marcus was born, your father had such dreams for you. He used to carry you around the house on his shoulders, telling you stories about how you'd run Westbrook someday." This was news to me. What changed? Life. Expectations. Your grandfather was a progressive man in many ways, but the board, the industry, they had traditional ideas about succession. When Marcus came along, it just seemed easier to follow the expected path. Easier for who? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "For everyone, I thought," Mom admitted. "I was wrong. We all were." She stood, kissing the top of my head like she used to when I was small. "Whatever you decide to do with the company, with your inheritance, I hope you know I'm proud of you. I always have been, even when I didn't show it well." After she left, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the window seat, gazing out at the moonlight reflecting off the ocean, trying to imagine what Grandpa would advise me to do now. The easy path would be to sell my shares, walk away with more money than I could spend in a lifetime, and continue my environmental research without the complications of family business politics. But that would betray Grandpa's trust, his vision for what Westbrook could be. The next morning, I woke early and slipped out of the house before anyone else was up. I needed space to think, to plan. I drove to the small inlet where Grandpa had taught me to fish, a secluded spot that had somehow escaped development. The rising sun painted the water gold as I sat on the weathered dock, feet dangling above the gentle waves. My phone buzzed. With an incoming call, Dr. Abernathy, my dissertation advisor. I'd almost forgotten the academic world I'd been immersed in just days ago. "Elena," she said when I answered, "I've been trying to reach you. Are you alright?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "Just dealing with some unexpected family matters." "I heard about your grandfather. I'm sorry for your loss. He was a remarkable man." "You knew him?" This surprised me. I'd kept my academic and family lives deliberately separate. "He reached out to me about 6 months ago," she explained. "Asked about your research, your progress. He was particularly interested in your work on sustainable manufacturing processes." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Grandpa had been investigating not just my character but my expertise, assessing how my knowledge could benefit the company. "Did he tell you why he was asking?" "Not explicitly. But he mentioned that Westbrook Industries might be interested in implementing some of your innovations." I assumed he was just being a proud grandfather. "He was more strategic than that," I said, a smile tugging at my lips despite everything. "Always thinking several moves ahead." "Elena," Dr. Abernathy said carefully, "whatever's happening with your family, don't forget your dissertation. You're too close to completion to get derailed now." "I won't," I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure how I'd manage both responsibilities. "Thank you for understanding." The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. I arrived at Westbrook headquarters at 9, dressed in the same blazer and slacks as yesterday, the best I could do until I had time to expand my professional wardrobe. The receptionist, a different one from yesterday, recognized me immediately. "Ms. Westbrook, your office is ready, as requested." My office? I hadn't requested an office. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Harrison from facilities set it up last night. 15th floor, east corner. Your grandfather's old office." Not the executive suite on the top floor that Dad now occupied, but the office Grandpa had used in his later years, after he'd stepped down as CEO but remained chairman emeritus. I followed the receptionist's directions and found a spacious corner office with views of both the harbor and the city. The furniture was simple but elegant, a large oak desk, comfortable chairs, bookshelves lined with engineering and business texts. On the desk sat a framed photograph I recognized immediately, Grandpa and me on his boat, holding up a striped base we'd caught together. I was 12, gap-toothed and grinning. He was in his 60s, tanned and vital, looking at me with unmistakable pride. Next to the photo was a small wooden box with my name engraved on the lid. Inside, I found a vintage fountain pen, Grandpa's favorite, the one he'd used to sign every important document throughout his career. Beneath it lay a handwritten note, for the next chapter of the Westbrook story. Write it well, little bird. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away as a knock sounded at the door. An older man entered, Walter Harrison, the facilities director, according to the badge clipped to his shirt pocket. Ms. Westbrook, is everything to your liking? Your grandfather left very specific instructions. It's perfect, thank you, I said, running my fingers over the smooth wood of the desk. How long have you worked for Westbrook, Mr. Harrison? 42 years this October, he said with quiet pride. Started in maintenance right out of high school. Your grandfather gave me a chance when no one else would. That sounds like him, I smiled. Always seeing potential others missed. Harrison nodded, his expression turning serious. There are many of us here, Ms. Westbrook, people who've been with the company for decades, who remember how things used to be. How your grandfather ran things. We've been concerned about the direction of the company these past few years. I share those concerns, I assured him. Which is why I'm here. His weathered face broke into a smile. Then I speak for many when I say welcome home, Ms. Westbrook. We've been waiting for you. The board meeting was every bit as contentious as I'd expected. The boardroom, with its intimidating mahogany table and leather chairs, was filled with mostly older men in expensive suits, Dad's peers and golf partners, people who had known me only as Richard Westbrook's headstrong daughter who'd chosen academia over business. Dad sat at the head of the table, with Marcus to his right. They'd left me a seat halfway down the table, a deliberate positioning to minimize my authority. Instead, I took the empty chair at the opposite end, directly facing Dad. A subtle power move, but an effective one. The room fell silent. Good morning, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Thank you all for accommodating this meeting on short notice. Howard Blackwell, the longest-serving board member and Dad's closest ally, spoke first. Ms. Westbrook, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, this meeting is highly irregular. Board agendas are set weeks in advance. There are protocols. I'm aware of the protocols, Mr. Blackwell, I interrupted. I'm also aware that as majority shareholder, I have the right to call a special meeting when circumstances warrant. These circumstances warrant. Dad cleared his throat. Elena, perhaps it would be best if you shared your concerns with me privately first. The board's time is valuable. So is mine, I countered. And I've spent enough of it being sidelined from company decisions. That ends today. For the next hour, I presented my findings on Westbrook's environmental violations, labor issues, and ethical lapses. I'd prepared slides, documentation, and a clear timeline showing how these problems had escalated since Dad took over leadership. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the evidence mounted. This is all very troubling, said Janet Chen, one of the few women on the board and a recent appointee. Why wasn't the board informed of these issues? Dad's jaw tightened. Many of these so-called issues are standard industry practices. My daughter has an idealistic view that doesn't account for competitive realities. Is breaking environmental laws a standard industry practice? I asked. Is hiding material risks from shareholders? Because those aren't just ethical problems, they're legal ones. Marcus leaned forward, his expression smug. The company has never been more profitable than under current leadership. That's what matters to our shareholders. Short-term profits at the expense of long-term sustainability isn't a strategy, I argued. It's a ticking time bomb. These environmental fines are just the beginning. Consumer boycotts, talent exodus, regulatory scrutiny, all of that is coming unless we change course. For the next part of the meeting, I presented my plan, a comprehensive strategy to transition Westbrook Industries to more sustainable practices while maintaining profitability. I'd spent the early morning hours finalizing it, drawing on my research, on conversations with Grandpa over the years, on case studies of companies that had successfully made similar transitions. This isn't just about doing the right thing, I concluded. Though that should be reason enough. It's about securing Westbrook's future in a changing world. The companies that adapt will thrive. The ones that cling to outdated, exploitative models will fail. Silence followed my presentation. Dad stared at me with a mixture of anger and something that might have been grudging respect. Marcus looked openly hostile. The other board members exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from thoughtful to calculating. You're asking for a complete overhaul of our business model, Howard Blackwell said finally. That's an enormous risk. Not changing is the bigger risk, I countered. And I'm not asking As majority shareholder, I'm directing the board to implement this transition plan. You can either be part of that process or you can resign. Dad stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. The board needs time to review these proposals. Fine, I agreed. But I expect a response within a week. After that, I'll be forced to consider more dramatic changes to company leadership. As the board members filed out, murmuring among themselves, Dad remained. Once we were alone, he turned to me, his expression unreadable. You prepared well. Your grandfather would be proud. The compliment, unexpected and sincere, caught me off guard. Thank you. But you're still naive, he continued. Business isn't a classroom. These men won't simply fall in line because you make a compelling presentation. They have interests, alliances, agendas. I know that, I said. I'm not as sheltered as you think. Then you should know that some of them are already planning to challenge the will, to question your grandfather's competency when he made these arrangements. This didn't surprise me. They won't succeed. Grandpa was meticulous. He had multiple doctors certify his cognitive health. He documented his reasoning. Everything was done by the book. Dad nodded, almost reluctantly. Yes, that sounds like him. Always 3 steps ahead. He paused, studying me with new eyes. You know, you remind me of him more than I realized. Not just your stubbornness, but your vision. The way you see possibilities others miss. I'll take that as a compliment, I said carefully. It is one, he admitted. Though it doesn't mean I agree with your approach. This company has been my life's work. I can't just stand by while you dismantle everything I've built. I'm not trying to dismantle it, I corrected him. I'm trying to evolve it. To bring it back to Grandpa's founding principles while moving it forward into a more sustainable future. Dad picked up his briefcase, preparing to leave. We'll see if the board agrees with your vision. Don't underestimate the resistance you'll face. After he left, I remained in the boardroom, staring at the family portrait hanging on the wall. Grandpa standing proudly with Dad and Marcus flanking him, Mom seated elegantly in front. I was there too, slightly off to the side, a teenage version of myself looking somewhat out of place. Even then, I'd felt like an outsider in my own family. My phone chimed with a text from Marcus, meet me at the Bristol in 30 minutes. We need to talk. The Bristol was an upscale bar downtown, a favorite haunt of Westbrook executives. I considered declining, but decided it was better to hear whatever he had to say. The Bristol was quiet at this time of day, just a few businesspeople having lunch meetings in the dim, wood-paneled interior. Marcus was already there, nursing a scotch at a corner table. He didn't stand when I approached. Bold move in there, he said as I sat across from him. Threatening the board on your first day. Not exactly building goodwill. I wasn't threatening. I was being direct about my expectations. He took a slow sip of his drink. Here's what you don't understand, Elena. This isn't just about environmental policies or labor practices. It's about relationships, influence, the entire ecosystem of business in this city. Dad has spent decades cultivating the connections that keep Westbrook thriving. Connections shouldn't replace ethics, I said. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let me be blunt. You're out of your depth. These board members, our major clients, our banking partners, they're not going to accept you as a legitimate leader. They'll smile to your face while undermining you at every turn. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm offering you a way out, he said. A clean exit. Sell your shares to Dad and me at a premium, say, 20% above market value. Walk away with billions. Fund your environmental research. Start your own company if you want. But leave Westbrook to the people who know how to run it. I laughed softly, shaking my head at Marcus's predictability. Is that what this is about? A buyout offer disguised as brotherly concern? It's a generous offer, he insisted, his fingers tightening around his glass. More than generous. It's not about the money, Marcus. It never has been. Then what is it about? Revenge? Proving something to Dad? To me? I studied my brother's face, the familiar features that mirrored my own in some ways, yet seemed to belong to a stranger. We'd grown up in the same house, with the same parents, the same privileges, yet somewhere along the way, we'd become fundamentally different people with incompatible values. It's about responsibility, I said finally. Grandpa trusted me with this company because he believed I would honor its original purpose, not just to make money, but to make things better. To create products that solve problems without creating new ones. To treat workers and communities with respect. He saw something in me that aligned with his vision. Marcus scoffed. Noble sentiments. But sentiment doesn't keep a company competitive. That's where you're wrong. The most competitive companies of the next decade will be the ones that adapt to changing expectations, from consumers, from employees, from regulators. Sustainability isn't just a moral imperative, it's a business necessity. You really believe that, don't you? There was something almost wistful in his tone. I do. And deep down, I think you might too. You're smarter than the role you've been playing, Marcus. You don't have to be Dad's echo. His expression hardened. Don't try to psychoanalyze me, Elena. I know exactly who I am and what I want. And I want Westbrook Industries, the company I've been groomed to lead my entire life. Then help me make it better, I challenged him. Work with me instead of against me. Your business expertise, my environmental vision, we could be a powerful team. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of consideration in his eyes. Then it vanished, replaced by cold determination. You have 24 hours to consider my offer. After that, things get complicated. Is that a threat? He stood, straightening his custom-tailored suit. It's a reality check. You've read some reports, made some slides. I've been living and breathing this business for years. I know where all the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking, of course. He tossed a few bills on the table. Think about it, Elena. You could do a lot of good with billions in your pocket and none of the headaches. After Marcus left, I remained at the table, turning my water glass slowly between my palms. His offer was tempting in some ways, a clean exit, financial security beyond imagination, the freedom to pursue my research without corporate politics or family drama. But it would mean abandoning Grandpa's vision, betraying his trust. And, beyond that, it would mean giving up on the potential to transform Westbrook Industries into a force for positive change. My phone buzzed with an incoming email, the agenda for tomorrow's executive committee meeting. I was now officially invited, my name listed directly after Dad's. The power dynamics were shifting, however slightly. I scrolled through the topics. Quarterly projections, the expansion of manufacturing facilities in Southeast Asia, updates on labor negotiations at the Ohio plant. Business as usual, exactly what I needed to change. That evening, I returned to my apartment to pack a proper bag. If I was going to take on this challenge, I needed more than one professional outfit. As I folded clothes into a small suitcase, my gaze fell on the framed photo beside my bed, the environmental engineering team at the lab, arms around each other's shoulders, celebrating after our breakthrough on the water filtration project. Those were my people, my world. How could I balance that life with my new responsibilities? A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and few people even knew where I lived. Cautiously, I peered through the peephole to see Mom standing in the hallway, looking distinctly out of place in her designer clothes. Against the backdrop of my worn-down building. Mom? I opened the door, surprised. How did you find my apartment? Your friend Zoe told me, she said, stepping inside and glancing around with poorly disguised shock at the smallness of the space, the second-hand furniture, the water stains spreading across one ceiling corner. Oh, Elena. Have you really been living like this? It's not that bad, I said defensively. It's close to campus, and the rent is manageable on my stipend. Mom set her purse down on my tiny kitchen counter, her expression troubled. I had no idea. All this time, I thought. I assumed your father was helping you financially. He made it clear years ago that he wouldn't support my wasteful educational choices, I reminded her, the old hurt resurfacing despite my efforts to keep my tone neutral. I should have checked. I should have made sure you were okay. Her voice caught. I'm so sorry, Elena. The simple apology, so unexpected, disarmed me completely. In all my years of struggling, of making do with less while Marcus had everything handed to him, I'd never heard those words from either of my parents. Why are you here, Mom? I asked, not unkindly. She sat on the edge of my futon, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I could remember seeing her. I found something today, while I was going through your grandfather's things in the library. A letter addressed to me, with instructions to open it only if you inherited his shares. She pulled an envelope from her purse and held it out to me. I think you should read it too. The envelope contained a single sheet of Westbrook Industries letterhead, covered in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. My dear Catherine, it began. If you're reading this, then Elena has inherited my controlling interest in the company, and the careful plan I've put in motion has taken its first step. I read aloud, my voice growing stronger with each paragraph. I know this decision will cause pain and confusion in our family. Richard will feel betrayed, Marcus disappointed, and you caught in the middle. For that, I'm truly sorry. But I've watched for years as the company I built has drifted from its founding principles under Richard's leadership. I've tried to guide him back, to remind him that profit without purpose is a hollow achievement, but he's chosen a different path. Mom nodded sadly, confirming Grandpa's assessment. I continued reading. Elena, though, reminds me so much of myself at her age, not just her intelligence or determination, but her moral compass. She sees beyond the quarterly reports to the human impact of our decisions. She understands that true success isn't measured in stock price alone, but in the lives we improve, the communities we strengthen, the planet we protect. Tears pricked my eyes as I read the next section. Catherine, I'm asking you to support Elena in the difficult days ahead. She will face resistance, skepticism, perhaps even sabotage. Richard and Marcus won't yield power easily or gracefully. But Elena has the strength to weather these storms, strength she inherited from you, though you may not recognize it in yourself. I looked up at Mom in surprise. She was crying silently, tears tracking through her perfect makeup. He's right, she said softly. I've always been stronger than I allowed myself to be. I let your father make the decisions, shape our family's path, because it was easier than standing up for what I knew was right. It's not too late, I told her, reaching for her hand. She squeezed my fingers tightly. No, it's not. Which is why I came to tell you something important. Your brother's offer, the buyout, it wasn't his idea. It was your father's. And if you refuse, they plan to contest the will on grounds of undue influence. My stomach dropped. They think they can prove I manipulated Grandpa? They're going to try. They've already contacted lawyers who specialize in trust disputes. Mom's expression hardened with unexpected resolve. But they won't succeed. Because I won't let them. What do you mean? I was there, Elena. For the past 3 years, I witnessed your grandfather's planning. The meetings with attorneys, the careful documentation of his wishes, the medical evaluations to establish his competency. He included me because he knew someday I might need to testify to his state of mind, his intentions. He was protecting you, and I'm going to honor that protection. I stared at her, seeing my mother in a new light. Dad won't forgive you for taking my side. Perhaps not, she acknowledged. But I can't forgive myself for staying silent all these years while he favored Marcus and dismissed your accomplishments. It's time I found my voice again. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that belied the storm brewing at Westbrook Industries. I dressed in clothes Mom had brought me from my childhood closet, a simple but elegant navy dress that still fit, surprisingly, and low heels that didn't pinch. The reflection in my bathroom mirror looked more confident than I felt, but perhaps that was the point. Sometimes you have to embody the strength you're still growing into. At the office, I found Walter Harrison waiting outside my door, his expression grim. Ms. Westbrook, I need to speak with you urgently. Inside, he closed the door carefully before speaking. There's something you should know. Late yesterday, after the board meeting, your father ordered IT to restrict your access to certain company servers, specifically, the ones containing records of environmental compliance and overseas labor practices. He can't do that, I said, anger flaring. I'm the majority shareholder. Technically, the CEO still controls day-to-day operations, including IT security protocols, Walter explained. But he paused, a slight smile creasing his weathered face. Some of us have been at Westbrook long enough to have our own access methods. He handed me a flash drive. Everything you need is here, complete records going back 5 years. I suggest you review them before the executive committee meeting. I stared at the small device, understanding the risk he'd taken. Walter, if Dad finds out you did this, some things are worth risking a job for, Ms. Westbrook. Your grandfather taught me that. He stood up for me 30 years ago when I needed someone in my corner. It's time I return the favor. The flash drive contained more damning evidence than I'd anticipated, internal emails discussing how to circumvent environmental regulations, reports documenting unsafe working conditions at overseas factories, compensation packages showing executives receiving bonuses tied directly to cost-cutting measures that endangered workers and communities. Armed with this information, I headed to the executive committee meeting, my resolve stronger than ever. Dad was already there, seated at the head of the table surrounded by his loyal lieutenants, the CFO, COO, and chief legal counsel, all men who'd been with him for years. Marcus sat at his right hand, as always. Elena, Dad acknowledged me with a curt nod. We weren't sure you'd make it. The meeting's about to start. I wouldn't miss it, I said, taking the seat directly opposite him, not at the foot of the table where they'd placed my nameplate, but the chair reserved for the executive chair. My chair, by right of my controlling interest. A murmur ran through the room as I made this power move. Dad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as his assistant distributed folders containing the meeting agenda and reports. Let's begin with the quarterly projections, he said, attempting to take control of the meeting. Actually, I interrupted, I'd like to start with something more pressing. I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. Yesterday, I discovered that my access to certain company records had been restricted. Fortunately, I was able to obtain them through other channels. Dad's face paled slightly. Elena, this isn't the time, it's exactly the time, I countered, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Because what these records show is a pattern of deliberate violations that put Westbrook at serious legal and financial risk. For the next 20 minutes, I presented the evidence Walter had provided, carefully, methodically, without emotion or accusation. Just facts, figures, documented decisions that couldn't be denied or explained away. The room grew increasingly tense as the scope of the problems became clear. Gerald Summers, the chief legal counsel, spoke first after my presentation. If these records are accurate, and I have no reason to doubt they are, we're looking at potential liability in the hundreds of millions. Not to mention criminal charges for some of these environmental violations. This is exactly why I restricted access to these files, Dad said, his voice tight with controlled fury. These are sensitive matters that require careful handling, not a public airing of every difficult decision we've had to make to keep this company competitive. Breaking the law isn't a difficult decision, I replied. It's a failure of leadership and ethics. What exactly are you proposing, Elena? That we self-report all these violations? Pay massive fines? Watch our stock price collapse? I'm proposing we fix the problems, I said. Immediately and transparently. Yes, there will be costs. Yes, it will affect short-term profits. But the alternative is far worse, continuing to operate as if these issues don't exist until we face a catastrophic failure that destroys the company and everything Grandpa built. Jennifer Hayes, the CFO, had been silent throughout the presentation, studying the numbers with her characteristic intensity. Now she looked up, her expression grave. Elena is right. From a purely financial perspective, these liabilities represent an existential threat to Westbrook if left unaddressed. The cost of remediation now, while substantial, is manageable. The cost of forced compliance after a major incident or investigation would be ruinous. Dad looked betrayed by this assessment from his normally loyal CFO. You can't be serious, Jennifer. We've weathered regulatory issues before. Not like this, she said firmly. Not at this scale. The debate continued for another hour, heated at times, technical at others. Gradually, I could see the momentum shifting. Not everyone was convinced by my vision for a more sustainable Westbrook Industries, but they were convinced by the risk of continuing on the current path. Self-preservation, if not ethics, was a powerful motivator. Finally, Dad held up his hand for silence. Enough. I see where this is going. He fixed me with a hard stare. You've made your point, Elena. Now what? It was the question I'd been waiting for, the opening to present the transition plan I'd refined since the board meeting. We change course. Not overnight, that would be impractical and potentially destabilizing. But decisively and visibly. I outlined a three-phase approach: immediate remediation of the most serious environmental and safety issues, development of new compliance systems and sustainability metrics. And finally, a comprehensive reimagining of Westbrook's products, processes, and corporate culture to align with the values Grandpa had originally built the company upon. This will be expensive, Dad warned, though his tone had shifted from outright opposition to reluctant consideration. Yes, I agreed. But it will also open new markets, attract top talent who want to work for responsible companies, reduce long-term regulatory risks, and position Westbrook as a leader rather than a laggard in the transition to sustainable industry. By the end of the meeting, we had the framework of an agreement, not a complete victory for my vision, but a significant step in the right direction. The executive team would work together to develop a detailed implementation plan for my proposed changes, with progress reviews scheduled weekly. Dad would remain CEO for now, with me taking the role of executive chair, focusing specifically on sustainability transition and corporate governance. As the others filed out, Dad remained behind, his expression unreadable. You outmaneuvered me, he said finally. Your grandfather would be proud. This isn't about winning or losing, Dad, I told him. It's about doing what's right for the company, for the people who depend on it, for the communities we operate in. Perhaps, he acknowledged. But it's also about power, who has it, how they use it. Today, you showed you know how to use it effectively. That's a lesson I didn't think you'd learned. I had a good teacher, I said. Just not the one you might think. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Your grandfather. Yes, he was always a master strategist. He gathered his papers, preparing to leave. Don't expect me to make this easy. For you, Elena. I still believe in my vision for this company. I don't want easy, I assured him. I want right. That evening, I returned to the Westbrook estate, not as a visitor this time, but as its rightful owner. The magnitude of this inheritance was still sinking in. The house where I'd grown up, with its sweeping grounds and ocean views, now belonged to me. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Mom was waiting in the library, a glass of wine in hand. "How did it go?" she asked as I collapsed into the leather armchair across from her. "Better than expected, worse than hoped," I said, accepting the glass she poured for me. "Dad agreed to implement some of my changes, but he's not fully on board yet. It's going to be a long battle." "He's stubborn," Mom said. "Like you. Like your grandfather. It's the Westbrook way." "Speaking of which," I said, gesturing to the room around us, "what am I supposed to do with this place? It's enormous for one person." "You could sell it," Mom suggested. "Use the money for your environmental initiatives." I considered this, looking around at the room filled with generations of family history, the bookshelves Grandpa had built himself, the portrait of my great-grandmother above the fireplace, the worn spot on the carpet where I'd sat for countless hours listening to Grandpa's stories. No, I decided. This house meant something to Grandpa. It should continue to mean something. An idea began to form, one that honored both my grandfather's legacy and my own values. What if we turned part of it into a research center? A place where environmental scientists and sustainable business experts could collaborate, develop new technologies, train the next generation of leaders? Mom's eyes lit up. Edward would have loved that idea. Using the family legacy to build something new and meaningful. "Where will you live?" I asked, suddenly realizing the implications for her. "This is your home too." "I've been thinking about that," she said. "Your father and we need some time apart. I've already moved my things to the guest house. It's more than enough space for me, and it gives us both room to figure out what comes next." I reached across and squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry this is causing such upheaval in your marriage." She shook her head. "Don't be. This reckoning has been coming for a long time. Your father and I lost our way, both as a couple and as individuals. Now we have a chance to find ourselves again, whatever that might mean." Later that night, I stood on the balcony outside my childhood bedroom, looking out over the moonlit ocean. The same view I'd gazed at countless times growing up, yet everything was different now. The weight of responsibility pressed on my shoulders. Not just for the company, but for the family legacy, for the people whose livelihoods depended on Westbrook Industries, for the communities affected by our operations. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "This isn't over." Simple, direct, unmistakably threatening. I wasn't surprised. My brother had never learned to lose gracefully, and in his mind, this was a battle he'd been unfairly deprived of winning. Rather than responding to his text, I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in weeks, Dr. Abernathy, my dissertation advisor. It was late, but I knew she often worked into the night. "Elena," she answered, sounding pleased rather than disturbed by the late call. "I was just thinking about you. How are you managing with everything?" "It's complicated," I admitted. "But I'm finding my way. Actually, I'm calling because I have an idea I want to run by you, about integrating my research with Westbrook Industries, creating something new that could benefit both worlds." For the next hour, we talked through possibilities, a research partnership between the university and Westbrook, focusing on sustainable manufacturing technologies, internship programs for promising environmental engineering students, a foundation to fund innovative solutions to industrial pollution problems. By the time we finished the call, the outline of a plan had taken shape, one that would allow me to honor both my academic commitments and my new responsibilities at Westbrook. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. But for the first time since the will reading, I felt a sense of clarity about the path forward. The next morning, I woke early and went for a run along the coastal path that wound through the Westbrook property. The rhythmic pounding of my feet against the earth helped clear my mind, prepare me for the day ahead. As I rounded the bend that offered the best view of the ocean, I stopped to catch my breath and watch the sunrise paint the water with gold. This was my inheritance, not just the house, the company, the material wealth, but this moment of possibility. The chance to take what my grandfather had built and transform it into something even more meaningful. The opportunity to prove that profit and purpose could coexist, that business could be a force for positive change in the world. I took a deep breath of salt-tinged air and turned back toward the house, ready to begin. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of challenges, small victories, and persistent resistance. Each morning, I arrived at Westbrook headquarters before dawn, reviewing reports and preparing for the battles ahead. Each evening, I returned to campus to work on my dissertation, determined not to abandon the research that had shaped my vision for the company's future. Sleep became a luxury, meals often forgotten entirely. But beneath the exhaustion, a sense of purpose kept me going, purpose that grew stronger with each sustainable initiative we implemented, each ethical policy we established. Today marked a milestone, the official unveiling of Westbrook's Sustainable Manufacturing Initiative, a comprehensive approach to reducing our environmental footprint while improving working conditions across all our facilities. The conference room buzzed with energy as board members, executives, and specially invited guests waited for the presentation to begin. I stood at the podium, surveying the audience. Dad sat in the front row, his expression carefully neutral. He'd fought me on nearly every aspect of the initiative, arguing that the costs were too high, the timeline too aggressive, the goals too idealistic. Yet grudgingly, step by step, he'd come to acknowledge the business case behind the changes. Particularly after our first quarterly earnings report showed unexpected growth in markets that valued sustainable products. Thank you all for coming, I began. 6 months ago, Westbrook Industries stood at a crossroads. We could continue down a path of short-term profits at the expense of our workers, our communities, and our planet, or we could reclaim the vision that made this company great in the first place. I clicked through slides showing the progress we'd made, a 40% reduction in hazardous waste at our Chicago facility, solar panels installed on manufacturing plants in 3 states, worker safety improvements that had reduced accidents by 60%. New product lines developed using recycled materials. These changes weren't easy, I acknowledged. They required significant investment, new ways of thinking, and a willingness to prioritize long-term sustainability over immediate returns. But the results speak for themselves. The next slide showed our latest financial results: revenue up 12%, costs down 8% thanks to energy efficiency measures, employee retention improved by 35%. Doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, it's good business. As I continued the presentation, I noticed Marcus slip into the back of the room. He'd been conspicuously absent from headquarters for weeks, working remotely and missing key meetings. His expression was unreadable as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed. After the formal presentation, as attendees mingled during the reception, Janet Chen, the board member who'd been most supportive of my initiatives, approached with a champagne flute in hand. Impressive work, Elena. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed we could accomplish so much so quickly. Thank you, I said. Though there's still so much more to do. Always looking ahead, she smiled. Just like your grandfather. She glanced around before lowering her voice. You should know, there's talk among some board members about accelerating the succession plan. Your father's contract as CEO comes up for renewal in 3 months. I blinked in surprise. I'm not looking to push him out. Maybe not, Janet said. But the results you're achieving are making people wonder if it's time for new leadership at all levels. Just something to think about. She squeezed my arm gently before moving on to chat with other guests. Dad approached next, his expression thoughtful as he surveyed the room. You've won them over, he observed. The board, the executive team, even some of my oldest allies. It's not about winning, Dad, I reminded him. Isn't it? He raised an eyebrow. You present it as a moral crusade, but you're playing the game just as strategically as I ever did. Maybe more so. I started to protest, but he held up a hand. That wasn't a criticism, Elena. It was a compliment. You're proving to be a more formidable business leader than I anticipated. Coming from him, this was high praise indeed. Thank you, I said simply. Don't thank me yet, he warned. Marcus isn't taking this well. He sees your success as his failure, and he's not one to accept defeat graciously. I've noticed his absence, I admitted. I've tried reaching out, but he doesn't return my calls. Dad sighed, suddenly looking older. He's always been challenging, even as a child. I recognize myself in him, the ambition, the drive, the need to prove himself. Perhaps that's why I favored him. Perhaps that's why I shouldn't have. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from my father. Before I could respond, Walter Harrison approached, his expression urgent. Ms. Westbrook, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation that requires your immediate attention. In a private office, Walter showed me what he'd discovered, evidence that someone had been tampering with the environmental compliance reports for our newest manufacturing facility in Detroit. The reports submitted to regulators showed emissions well within legal limits, but the raw data told a different story. How long has this been happening? I asked, scanning the falsified documents. At least 3 months, Walter said grimly. Since shortly after you announced the Sustainable Manufacturing Initiative. Who had access to modify these reports? Walter hesitated. That's the concerning part. According to our system logs, the changes were made using Marcus's security credentials. My stomach dropped. I'd expected resistance, even sabotage, but this crossed a line into potentially criminal territory. Does anyone else know about this? Not yet, Walter assured me. I came directly to you. Thank you, Walter. I need to handle this carefully. After he left, I sat alone in the office, wrestling with the implications. If these falsified reports became public, the damage to Westbrook's reputation would be devastating, undoing all the progress we'd made in rebuilding trust with regulators, customers, and communities. More importantly, it would mean we'd been polluting above legal limits for months, potentially harming the people living near our facility. The right thing to do was clear, correct the reports, implement immediate measures to reduce emissions at the Detroit plant, and inform regulators of the violation. But what about Marcus? His actions weren't just a betrayal of me, but of the entire company and its new direction. I called him directly, my voice steady despite my churning emotions. We need to talk. Now. He agreed to meet at Grandpa's old boathouse on the estate, neutral territory, away from corporate politics and prying eyes. The small wooden structure sat at the edge of the property, overlooking a small inlet where Grandpa had kept his sailboat. I hadn't been inside since his passing. Marcus was already there when I arrived, staring out at the water, hands in his pockets. He'd lost weight in the past months, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. Let me guess, he said, without turning around. You found the reports. Why, Marcus? I asked, the simple question encompassing all my hurt, anger, and confusion. He turned then, his expression hard. Because you needed to fail. You needed to see that your idealistic crusade has real costs, real consequences. That sometimes corners get cut because they have to be, not because people are evil or greedy. The Detroit facility could have met emission standards, I countered. We have the technology, the expertise. It would have cost more upfront, yes, but nothing, he interrupted. Every dollar spent on your pet environmental projects is a dollar that doesn't go to shareholders, to growth, to staying ahead of our competitors. Dad never understood that. Neither do you. So you falsified environmental reports, risked criminal charges, put people's health at risk, all to prove a point? His jaw tightened. I did what I thought was necessary to protect the company. The company doesn't need protection from doing the right thing, Marcus. It needs protection from people who think ethics are optional. We argued for nearly an hour, going in circles as Marcus defended his actions and I tried to make him understand the gravity of what he'd done. Finally, exhausted, I laid out his options. You can resign voluntarily, cooperate with our internal investigation, and help us fix the problems at the Detroit facility. Or I can take this to the board and the authorities. You do that? He asked, disbelief coloring his voice. Turn in your own brother? I don't want to, I admitted. But I will if I have to. This isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about all the people who depend on Westbrook doing the right thing. Marcus laughed bitterly. Always the moral compass. Just like Grandpa. He paced the small confines of the boathouse, running his hands through his hair in frustration. You know what your problem is, Elena? You think business can be pure, clean, perfect. It can't. It's messy and complicated and sometimes you have to make compromises. There's a difference between compromise and corruption, I said quietly. Grandpa understood that. That's why he built a company that was both profitable and ethical. It can be done. We're doing it now. Something in my words seemed to reach him, because his expression shifted, the anger giving way to something that looked almost like grief. I can't stay, he said finally. Not with you in charge, changing everything, dismantling the company I thought I'd lead someday. We're not dismantling it, I corrected him. We're evolving it. And there could be a place for you in that evolution. If you wanted it. He shook his head. I don't. Not anymore. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'll resign. Send the paperwork to my lawyer. But don't expect me to help with your investigation or your damage control. That's on you now. After he left, I remained in the boathouse, surrounded by memories of Grandpa, his fishing gear still hanging on the wall, the collection of nautical maps spread across an old table, the faint scent of the pipe tobacco he'd favored. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry, for the brother I'd lost, for the family fractured by ambition and conflicting values, for the weight of responsibility I carried alone. The next morning, I faced the board with the truth about the Detroit facility. As expected, the revelation caused shock, anger, and panic. Some board members immediately suggested covering up the violations, fixing the problems quietly without informing regulators. That's not an option, I said firmly. We're going to do this right, disclose the violations voluntarily, implement immediate corrective measures, and accept whatever penalties are assessed. It's the only way to live up to the standards we've set for ourselves. The debate was heated, but in the end, my position prevailed. Dad, surprisingly, supported me. Elena's right, he said, silencing the room with his unexpected endorsement. Westbrook doesn't hide from its mistakes. We acknowledge them, fix them, and do better. In the weeks that followed, we worked around the clock to address the Detroit situation. The voluntary disclosure earned us some leniency from regulators, though we still faced significant fines. More importantly, we implemented state-of-the-art emission control systems at the facility, not just meeting legal requirements but exceeding them. Marcus's resignation was announced with a brief statement citing personal reasons. The financial press speculated wildly about the rift in the Westbrook family, but we kept the true reasons private. Despite everything, he was still my brother. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I sat in Grandpa's old office, my office now, reviewing the quarterly reports. The numbers told a story of transformation, sustainable product lines outperforming traditional ones, energy costs decreasing thanks to efficiency measures, employee satisfaction at an all-time high. We'd weathered the Detroit crisis and emerged stronger, more committed to our new direction. A knock at the door interrupted my review. Dad entered, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course," I said, setting aside the reports. Our relationship had evolved in recent months, not warm, exactly, but respectful. We'd found a way to work together despite our different approaches, united by a shared commitment to Westbrook's success. He sat across from me, hands clasped on his knee. "My contract as CEO comes up for renewal next week." "I know," I said carefully. The succession question had been looming large in recent board discussions. "I've been thinking," he continued, "that perhaps it's time for a change. A complete change, not just the half measures we've been taking." I studied him, trying to understand what he was suggesting. "What kind of change?" "I'm going to recommend to the board that they appoint you as CEO, effective immediately." The statement hung in the air between us, momentous and unexpected. "Dad, let me finish," he said. "I've watched you these past months. The way you handled the Detroit situation, the sustainable manufacturing initiative, the new product lines. You've proven yourself in ways I never gave you the opportunity to do before. You're ready for this. The company needs your vision now, not my outdated perspective." "I never sought to replace you," I said honestly. "I know. That's part of why you're the right person for the job." He smiled slightly. "Your grandfather saw it before any of us. He always was the wisest of the Westbrooks." 2 days later, the board unanimously approved my appointment as CEO of Westbrook Industries. The news made headlines in the business press, with analysts speculating about what this leadership change would mean for the company's future. Mom sent flowers to my office with a simple note, "So proud of you. Grandpa would be too." That evening, as I prepared to leave the office after my first official day as CEO, Walter Harrison appeared at my door with a small wooden box. "This was in your grandfather's personal safe," he explained, "with instructions to give it to you when you became CEO. He was quite certain that day would come." Inside the box, I found a vintage compass, Grandpa's prized possession from his sailing days, and another handwritten note, "The true north of a company isn't profit, Elena. It's purpose. Never forget the difference. With love and absolute faith in you, Grandpa." I ran my fingers over the compass, its brass casing worn smooth from years of use. Grandpa had always said that even with modern navigation systems, he trusted this compass most, its magnetic needle unerringly finding true north through storms and calm seas alike. In the months and years that followed, I kept that compass on my desk, a reminder of the principles guiding Westbrook Industries under my leadership. We transformed our manufacturing processes to minimize environmental impact, invested in renewable energy across all our facilities, implemented industry-leading labor practices, and developed new product lines focused on solving environmental challenges rather than contributing to them. It wasn't always easy. We faced resistance from competitors, skepticism from some investors, regulatory hurdles, and technical challenges. But with each obstacle overcome, our resolve strengthened. The company that had once been known primarily for its profit margins was now recognized as a leader in sustainable business practices, proving that ethical leadership and financial success could go hand in hand. Dad remained on the board, offering wisdom gained from decades of experience while supporting our new direction. To my surprise, he became one of my strongest advocates, defending our sustainability initiatives to skeptical industry colleagues and investors. "I was wrong," he admitted during one particularly contentious board meeting. "I thought Elena's approach was idealistic and impractical. But she's proven that doing the right thing can also be the smart thing. That's a lesson I needed to learn. Marcus and I eventually reconciled, though not in the way I might have expected. After 2 years traveling abroad, he returned with a new perspective and a business plan for a sustainable agriculture startup. I've been watching what you're doing at Westbrook, he told me over coffee at a neutral location, not the family estate, not corporate headquarters. It made me think about what Grandpa was trying to teach us all along. About legacy, about impact, about using business as a force for good. I listened, cautiously optimistic about this changed version of my brother. What are you asking for, Marcus? Not asking, he clarified. Offering. I've developed a vertical farming system that uses 95% less water than traditional agriculture. It could revolutionize food production in water-stressed regions. I thought, maybe Westbrook might be interested in helping scale it. It was the beginning of a new chapter for our family, not erasing the painful past, but building something better on its foundation. Westbrook Sustainable Agriculture became a successful subsidiary, with Marcus leading its development while I continued as CEO of the parent company. Mom found her own path as well, establishing the Westbrook Foundation to support environmental education and research. I spent too many years defining myself through your father's ambitions, she told me. It's time I created something of my own. The foundation quickly gained recognition for its innovative programs connecting business leaders with environmental scientists, fostering the kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration that had inspired my own approach at Westbrook Industries. 5 years after that fateful reading, I stood at the podium in the newly established Edward Westbrook Center for Sustainable Innovation, the research facility we'd created on the grounds of the family estate, just as I'd envisioned that first night. Behind me, a portrait of Grandpa watched over the proceedings, his kind eyes and determined expression captured perfectly by the artist. My grandfather understood something fundamental about business and life, I told the assembled researchers, students, and industry partners. That true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in impact. That a company's greatest asset isn't its balance sheet, but its character. That leadership isn't about power, but about purpose. I looked out at the diverse faces before me, young engineers developing biodegradable materials, veteran manufacturing experts reimagining production processes, scientists and business leaders collaborating on solutions to environmental challenges. This was Grandpa's true legacy, not just a successful company, but a vision of what business could be at its best. When my grandfather said I would inherit everything, he wasn't just talking about material assets, I continued. He was entrusting me with his vision, his values, his belief that profit and purpose could align. That inheritance came with responsibility, to lead with integrity, to prioritize long-term impact over short-term gain, to remember that business decisions affect real people and real communities. After the ceremony, I walked alone through the gardens Grandpa had loved, reflecting on the journey of the past 5 years. The path hadn't been straight or simple. There had been setbacks, mistakes, moments of doubt. But through it all, that compass had guided me, the unerring pull toward true north, toward purpose aligned with prosperity. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Abernathy, saw the coverage of the center opening. Edward would be bursting with pride. As am I. My dissertation had been completed 2 years earlier, focusing on the implementation of sustainable manufacturing processes at Westbrook. The case study had become required reading at business schools across the country, evidence that corporate transformation was possible when principled leadership met innovative thinking. As the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I sat on the same dock where Grandpa had taught me to fish, to sail, to see beyond the horizon. In my hand, I held his compass, its needle pointing steadfastly north despite the changing world around it. I get it now, Grandpa, I said softly to the gathering dusk. What you were trying to teach me all along. It wasn't just about the company or the money or even the environmental initiatives. It was about finding my own true north and having the courage to follow it, even when the seas got rough. The breeze carried the scent of salt water and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that business could be a force for good in the world. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, I simply felt grateful for the inheritance that had seemed like a burden but proved to be a blessing. For the family that had fractured but found a way to heal, and for the grandfather who had seen in me not just who I was, but who I could become. In the end, I hadn't just inherited a company. I'd inherited a vision, and the chance to make it reality. That was the greatest gift of all. 10 years after that pivotal reading, Westbrook Industries had transformed from a traditional manufacturing corporation with a checkered environmental record into a global leader in sustainable business practices. Our stock had tripled in value. Industry publications that once criticized our risky pivot now featured us as a case study in successful corporate evolution. Most importantly, the communities where we operated thrived alongside us, with cleaner air and water, good jobs with living wages, and a sense of partnership rather than exploitation. I stood at the window of my office, watching workers install the final solar panels on our headquarters roof, the culmination of our pledge to make all Westbrook facilities carbon neutral by 2035, a goal we were achieving 5 years ahead of schedule. The morning sun glinted off the panels, symbols of how far we'd come. Ms. Westbrook. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. The leadership team is assembled for the strategy meeting. Thank you, Lydia. I'll be right there. The conference room buzzed with energy as I entered. Around the table sat the diverse team I'd built over the years, some veterans from Grandpa's era who'd embraced our new direction. Others brought in specifically for their expertise in sustainable business practices. Dr. Abernathy, who had joined us as Chief Research Officer after a distinguished academic career, looked up from her tablet with a smile. Good morning, everyone, I began. Today we're discussing something I've been considering for a long time, the next evolution of Westbrook Industries. The room quieted, attention focused on the large screen as I brought up the first slide of my presentation. For the past decade, we've been working to transform this company from within, changing our processes, our products, our culture. We've proven that a business can be profitable while also being responsible. But I believe we can do more. The presentation outlined my vision for what I called the Westbrook model, a comprehensive framework for sustainable business that we would open source to companies worldwide. Not just our technological innovations, but our governance structures, employee ownership programs, community engagement strategies, and environmental management systems, everything that had made our transformation successful. Are you suggesting we give away our competitive advantages? Asked Victor Chen, our Chief Strategy Officer. I'm suggesting we expand our definition of success, I replied. Yes, we've created shareholder value. Yes, we've built a profitable business. But if we truly believe in our mission of creating a more sustainable future, we need to scale our impact beyond just Westbrook. The discussion that followed was robust, with valid concerns raised about protecting proprietary technology, maintaining market position, and ensuring our continued financial strength. But there was also excitement about the potential to amplify our impact, to become not just a successful company but the catalyst for a movement. Elena, Dad spoke up from his position at the end of the table. Your grandfather would have loved this. At 73, he remained on the board though he'd stepped back from day-to-day involvement. His silver hair and lined face gave him a distinguished appearance, and time had softened the hard edges of his personality. He always said, "A true leader doesn't just climb the mountain, they build a path for others to follow." That's exactly what we're proposing, I nodded. Building the path. After the meeting, Dad lingered behind. Walk with me, he suggested. I could use some fresh air. We strolled through the company campus, past the vegetable gardens tended by employees during lunch breaks, the daycare center where workers' children played, the charging stations for electric vehicles. All initiatives that had once seemed radical but now formed the fabric of Westbrook's corporate culture. You know, Dad said as we walked, there was a time when I thought your inheritance would destroy everything I'd built. I remember. I smiled wryly. I couldn't have been more wrong. He stopped, turning to face me directly. What you've built is far beyond anything I could have imagined for this company. You didn't just preserve Westbrook, you transformed it into something extraordinary. Coming from him, this was high praise indeed. Our relationship had evolved over the years from antagonism to grudging respect to genuine admiration. We would never be close in the conventional sense, too much history, too many fundamental differences in our worldviews, but we'd found a way to value each other's strengths. I had help, I acknowledged. Including yours. He waved this away. I followed your lead, eventually. But it was your vision all along. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I've been thinking about what you said in there, about expanding our impact. I'd like to contribute to that effort in a more substantial way. What did you have in mind? I want to establish a fund for former industry executives who want to transform their companies along the Westbrook model. Mentorship, resources, transition planning. Many of my contemporaries are interested in what we've done here but don't know how to begin, especially in traditional industries. I was touched by his proposal, not just the generosity of it, but the insight. Dad had finally embraced not just the what of our transformation but the why. That's a wonderful idea. It addresses a real gap in the ecosystem. He nodded, satisfied. Good. I'll have my team draft a proposal. Now, he glanced at his watch, I'm meeting your mother for lunch. She's back from her conference in Stockholm. And full of ideas for the Foundation's next initiative. My parents' relationship had undergone its own evolution in the years following the inheritance revelation. After a period of separation, they'd found their way back to each other, not as the traditional couple they'd once been, with dad dominant and mom supportive, but as equals with independent interests and shared values. Mom had flourished as head of the Westbrook Foundation, becoming a respected voice in environmental philanthropy. That evening, I drove to the family estate, still my legal residence, though I'd transformed most of it into the research center while maintaining private quarters in the East Wing. The grounds were busy with activity as researchers worked in the labs, students collaborated in study groups, and visiting scientists shared ideas over dinner in what had once been the formal dining room. I found Marcus in the greenhouse, examining seedlings for his latest vertical farming project. At 38, he'd matured into a thoughtful entrepreneur with his own definition of success. The competitive edge that had once driven him to sabotage my efforts now fueled innovations in sustainable agriculture. "How was the strategy meeting?" he asked, carefully transferring a seedling to a new growing medium. "Productive. The leadership team approved the Westbrook Model Initiative." He nodded approvingly. "Bold move. Very you. How's the drought-resistant rice coming along?" I asked, gesturing to the plants he was tending. His face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Promising results in the initial trials. If the field tests in East Africa confirm our lab data, this could help farmers maintain yields with 40% less water." We chatted about his project as he worked, the easy camaraderie between us still sometimes surprising after our earlier estrangement. The path to reconciliation hadn't been straightforward, there had been setbacks, lingering resentments, moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge. But gradually, we built a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition. "I've been thinking about Grandpa a lot lately," Marcus said, setting down his tools. "About what he saw in each of us." "What do you mean?" He knew exactly what he was doing with that will. He understood that you needed the authority of ownership to implement your vision, and that I needed to find my own path outside Dad's shadow. He smiled ruefully. It just took me a while to appreciate his wisdom. He played the long game, I agreed. Always thinking 3 moves ahead. "Come on," Marcus said, removing his gardening gloves. "I want to show you something." He led me to his office in what had once been the estate's carriage house. On his desk sat a small bonsai tree, meticulously pruned and cared for. "Grandpa gave me this the day before he died. Said it would teach me patience and perspective." He laughed softly. I was furious at the time, thought he was criticizing me again. Now I understand he was giving me exactly what I needed. I studied the tiny tree, its proportions perfect despite its miniature size. "It's beautiful. It's taught me that growth doesn't always look like what we expect," Marcus said. "Sometimes it's slow, deliberate, shaped by constraints that ultimately create something stronger." His words resonated with my own journey, the constraints that had shaped me, from the financial struggles during graduate school to the resistance I'd faced transforming Westbrook. What had seemed like limitations had often become catalysts for innovation, for finding different paths forward. Later that night, I sat in Grandpa's old study, now my private sanctuary when I needed quiet reflection. The room remained largely as he'd left it, with his collection of nautical maps, first edition books on exploration, and the hand-carved chess set where he'd taught me to think strategically. On the wall hung a simple framed quote that had guided his life and now guided mine: "True wealth is measured by what you give, not what you keep." My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe, my closest friend since graduate school and now Westbrook's chief sustainability officer. "Have you seen the Forbes profile? They're calling you the executive who reinvented American manufacturing. About time they noticed what we've been doing for a decade." I smiled, appreciating her enthusiasm but knowing that public recognition had never been the goal. The real measure of our success wasn't in magazine profiles but in the tangible changes we'd created, the rivers running cleaner near our facilities, the employees who owned shares in the company they helped build, the communities that had transformed alongside us. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my office, Howard Blackwell, now in his 80s, who had been Dad's strongest ally on the board and my fiercest opponent in those early days. He'd retired years ago but remained a respected voice in business circles. "Elena," he said as he settled into the chair across from my desk, "I appreciate you making time to see me on short notice." "Of course," I replied, curious about the purpose of his visit. "What brings you back to Westbrook?" He placed a folder on the desk between us. "I'm chairing the selection committee for the Barrett Prize for Corporate Leadership. The committee has unanimously voted to present this year's award to you." The Barrett Prize was the most prestigious recognition in American business, given annually to a leader who had demonstrated exceptional vision and impact. Past recipients included some of the most transformative figures in corporate history. "I'm honored," I said, genuinely surprised. But there must be many deserving candidates. Howard smiled, the expression softening his habitually stern features. None who've done what you have. When you took over Westbrook, I was certain you would run it into the ground with your idealistic notions about sustainability and corporate responsibility. He shook his head. I've never been so happy to be proven wrong. You've created the model for what business can and should be in the 21st century. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.